Delighted to host and chair this session on emissions, ecology, and the economy, US and European perspectives on waste management. Really, the center of the discussion today will be the German case, and then we'll try to broaden it a little bit in terms of European perspectives, but then also get perspectives from this side of the Atlantic in on the issue. The German case suggests that significant energy and costs can be saved by replacing the practice of landfill untreated municipal waste with energy-efficient treatment techniques and by separating the collection and use of recyclable materials. In the past, German case, waste was simply landfilled, but it has since been recognized that waste contains valuable raw materials which can be used to conserve natural resources. Today's session will provide an update on the German experience with the greening of the waste management sector and explore implications for Europe and the United States. Let me just say briefly that the German system, which I know from my family is still over there, and when I go and visit, I get to experience it firsthand, is based really on three pillars: avoidance, recovery, and disposal. Waste avoidance, of course, means consuming fewer raw materials and reducing the burdens on the environment. Waste recovery meaning the raw materials and energy that are reintroduced in the economic cycle. And then, of course, it's the challenge of environmentally sound disposal of the remaining residual waste. Germany took a significant step in that direction by banning landfilling of untreated household wastes and general waste in June of 2005. 5 years later, a report by the German Environmental Agency, and that's kind of the core of today's panel, center of today's panel, suggests that this has been a success, that since the landfilling of untreated municipal waste has been discontinued, key potential in Germany for reducing greenhouse gas emissions has substantially been reduced. The potential has been tapped, but in the rest of the EU 27, the situation is quite different. I think there's about 40% of waste is still landfilled. So some interesting developments on the German case and questions about Europe at large. German government aims to achieve almost complete high-quality recovery, at least of municipal waste, by 2020, a very ambitious goal. The idea is to completely eliminate the need to landfill wastes, which has, of course, with all the adverse effects that has on the climate. The German government has also been proactive in developing waste management at the European and international level. And I think this regulatory dimension is of interest internationally and to this country as well. So I will leave it at that and then turn to our very distinguished panel in a moment. Not without saying, though, that this event has been co-sponsored by the German Embassy, it's part of the Transatlantic Climate Bridge, an initiative launched by the German government in 2008 to foster transatlantic cooperation and partnerships between Germany and the US in the climate and energy area at the local, state, and federal level. Within the center, the program is co-sponsored by our Environmental Change and Security Program, our program on America and the global economy, and the Global Energy Initiative, and is part of a series at my program, the European program, European Energy Initiative. Enough said by way of introduction. Let me introduce our first speaker, Jochen Flassbart, the president of the German Federal Environmental Agency. He assumed the office of the president of Germany's largest national environmental authority in September 2009. He previously served as head of the Nature Conservation and Sustainable Use of Natural Resources Directorate, these German names, at the Federal Ministry for Environment. Prior to that, he served for 11 years as director of the Nature and Biodiversity Conservation Union, an association which he helped modernize. Since the mid-1980s, he has served in various volunteer capacities at a number of environmental agencies and organizations, including acting as a member of the steering committee of the Deutscher Naturschutzring and as founding member of the Verkehrsclub Deutschland, an association for sustainable mobility and a major German transport and environmental organization. As a member of the supervisory board of the Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment and Energy, he has cooperated closely on climate and resource protection research projects. Main focus areas of his work in environmental policy have included nature conservation as well as ecological transport policy, climate protection, and ecological finance policy. As an environmental expert, he was a member of the National Committee for Sustainable Development, convened by then Minister of the Environment, Angela Merkel, as well as the National Sustainability Council, founded by Chancellor Gerhard Schröder. He has played a key role in the success of the UN's biodiversity strategy program in Bonn, and has since headed the presidency of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. So he's eminently qualified to lead off the discussion today. He will give an initial survey, and then will be aided by his colleague at the German EPA, Marlene Sieg, who will take us through a PowerPoint. We've got a number of PowerPoints here today, so let me ask all of the speakers to be succinct and keep to the time limit so that we have a little bit of time later on for discussion with all of you. So, Jochen Flassbart, welcome.
Thanks a lot for the warm welcome and listening to all what I did in the past. Very interesting. I will not PowerPoint you. Let me just give a very short overview of the topic we are discussing about today, the contribution of waste management to climate change. And what I would like to do is to put the waste management contribution into the broader picture of climate change requirements. As you know, we have the 2 degrees commitment lastly got in Cancun. We know that this means 80 to 95% following the IPCC advice for the industrialized countries, and we know that we have to do a lot in our electricity sectors, in the way how we produce, in the industry sector, in the mobility sector, and I don't want to go deep into this one. But looking at all the assessments, we will see that there is still a gap, and that we have to seek for additional sources to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this brings us immediately to the waste management sector, where we found that there is still a tremendous potential to contribute to overall climate change policy. Our agency, UBA, well, the counterpart to EPA in some way, or a big brother or sister, or how you want to gender it, in the US, we launched a study on the potential of greenhouse gas cuts in greenhouse gas emissions by the waste management sector in 2005, and that was followed by some recent studies Marlene Sieg will introduce in a few minutes. Well, let me tell you a little story at the beginning. When I started as a young environmentalist in my hometown in the industrialized area, Ruhr area in Germany, where we had all the steel and coal production, One of the things I did at the very beginning was to fight against an incineration. And we were fearing the pollutants, and apart from that, the philosophy of the NGOs and parts of the environment policy establishment was you have to narrow the end of the whole life cycle to make it as complicated as possible to get rid of the waste in order to organize the rest of the life cycle before the end. And so incineration was seen as something like an open door for new waste, against resource efficiency, against change of consumption patterns. And that was the world we were living in the 80s, and incineration, thermal treatment of waste definitely did not fit to this philosophy. And it was not in my life plan that I at some time would advocate for incinerations as part of a sustainable economy. But in fact it is. And the biggest contribution to climate change policies by the waste management sector was indeed, as was mentioned just before, the landfill ban in Germany in 2005. This was the major step forward to reduce methane emissions in Germany 20-fold more, with a 20-fold higher greenhouse effect than CO2. So it was so tremendously important to tackle this issue. Apart from the direct effect that we could reduce methane emissions, we have a secondary effect, and that is a contribution by increased recycling and reuse, by having effects on the eco-design, on the resource design of materials, of products. And with that altogether, we could gain quite important contributions to our climate change policy. And one of the results, with a view to the whole European Union, the EU 27, is that from the source for greenhouse gas emissions from 78 million tons CO2 equivalents in 2007, in our assessment, we can reduce not only these emissions, but we can bring them to a credit up to 150 million ton CO2 equivalents around 2020. So you can see what has been a problem can be part of the solution in the future. We just discussed that with our colleague from EPA, the issue of methane. Our approach is to reduce it wherever possible, but of course there still is a wide field of using methane where it is not avoidable, and that is definitely true for those countries who are not in a position for thermal treatment, pre-treatment of their waste at the moment. Unfortunately, it's still the case in some parts of Europe. A complete landfill ban in Europe would lead to another cut in greenhouse gas emission quite substantially, but still there are some countries we have to accept that are not in a position yet to follow this line. And if you look to other parts of the world where they are still on their way, not thinking about pre-treatment, thermal pre-treatment, but doing the first steps in collecting waste and landfilling it, then of course there is another source of using methane as a part of the energy supply. So that, in a nutshell, is what I want to say as an introduction, and I'm happy that Marlene Sieg is here to give us a presentation.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to present the results of our study to you. I was asked to keep it very short, so it will be maybe a quite hard ride for you if you're not already familiar with life cycle assessments and so on, but we will try. I'm talking today about the municipal waste. That's the green, oh, wait a second, the green part. So you see it's not the biggest part of the total waste arising. the biggest share is construction and demolition waste, but in Germany we have about 90% recovery of construction and demolition waste. And I will talk today about household waste or municipal waste. And what already was said here several times is that Germany has had a quite tremendous change in managing its waste. So we had, in 1990, we had a quite high share of household waste going to landfills. And since then, it was already reduced in steps. And from 2005 on, we have this landfill ban from mid of 2005. And so 2006, it was already nearly zero going to landfill, only some smaller parts from exemptions that were still in place. And at the same time, you have to do something with your waste because we could not avoid everything at that time right away. So we have quite a share of incineration, bio-waste collection and treatment, then a lot of separate collected recyclable materials, paper, glass, light plastics. And we have also a little bit, this light blue here is mechanical biological treatment. That's a special treatment. If somebody's interested, I can say something about it later. It's a pre-treatment like incineration. That is, afterwards, the residues are allowed to go to landfill. So, and here you can see in 1990, we had about 87% still residues going to the so-called gray bin, and only 13% of recycling, and it changed dramatically. In 2007, it was 38% only residues and 62% recycling, which is mostly paper, glass, lightweight packaging, and bio-waste. We have some other smaller waste streams that are separately collected in some regions, but it's mostly the important. And due to that, you see that methane emissions from landfill sites in Germany went down tremendously already up to now. And we assume that in 2020, 90% will already have been decreased compared to 1990. Yeah, this landfill ban for untreated waste, it's not a real ban. It just means that you're not allowed to landfill household waste anymore without pretreatment. And pretreatment means either incineration or mechanical biological treatment, that you can keep certain standards in the waste that is then put to landfill. And we have about 70 waste incineration plants in Germany with about 20 million tons capacity nowadays, and 50 mechanical biological waste treatment plants with 7 million tons capacity. Yeah, and we did this greenhouse gas balance for Germany. We had different scenarios. We made a scenario for 2006, and it's a life cycle assessment. That means we take into account all the greenhouse gas impacts, but also credits for recycling, for incineration, and treatment of residual waste on the basis of current technology. That was balanced with a recycling rate of about 62%. And then we have three different scenarios for 2020. One is only improvement of technical standards, but without changing the waste flows. Then we have a second one where we assume that 50% of the recyclable waste that is still in the residues today can be taken out and processed in recycling plants. That is then a recycling rate of 72%, and we had a third scenario where these two options, technical and changing the flows, are combined. And the results you can see here. In 1990, we have still a quite heavy burden from the methane from landfills, which is a much more climate-relevant gas than CO2. And in 2006, let me try, I don't know whether there will, okay. You can see that we have already got no more burden, but a net credit. That means all the action from waste management releases the climate. We have more positive effects than burdens. And that's by, on the one hand, by recycling, that you use very less energy if you use secondary raw materials than the virgin materials, and on another hand, by the energy recovery in efficient treatment plants. And you see that up to 2020, we still have a potential of about 10 million CO2 equivalents in Germany if we put in place all the improvements we assumed. And for Europe, we have a quite different picture. It's a sort of a puzzle, probably as if you would take the results for the different states here in the US. It's not everywhere the same recycling rates and so on. And you can see that some countries like Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, Belgium, already landfill very little amounts. But we have other countries in Europe, like, for example, the newer European countries in Eastern Europe, but also like Greece or even like United Kingdom, that still heavily rely on landfill. And that's the case, although we all live under the same European law, but what the country can make out of it is quite different. And what also might be very interesting for you, because I know this discussion very well from Germany, is that you can see that it's not true that countries who have a lot of incineration or little landfilling have no recycling, because you can see quite well that recycled waste, that is on the one hand this green is recycled and then this one is composted, that you have the highest recycling rates in those countries who have little landfilling. So that might be interesting for your discussions here. Yeah, and the results for Europe, I will just say very, very briefly. At the moment, we have a quite high burden from landfilling. It's up to 110 million tons CO2 equivalent. Up to means those of you who know, it's a tricky calculation with how much gas is getting out of the landfill, how much is collected, and how do you calculate it. So, yeah, but up to 110 million tons still out of landfills from methane, and quite little credits for recycling and energy recovery. And so in Europe, the potential is the potential is much bigger than in Germany. We have even 190 million ton CO2 equivalents up to 2020 if we put in place some improvements. And so our conclusion for Europe, for the EU 27, is at the moment we have a burden of 78 million tons. We can reduce it and come to a total net saving of up to 190 million tons of CO2 equivalents. And that you have an imagination what this means. The EU, I think we will hear something from Christian Egenhofer probably about targets of the climate targets in Europe. We have an internal agreement, a voluntary target of 20% reduction up to 2020. And the share that waste management could deliver is up about to 32%. So it's quite an impressive share. It's not just a little bit. So that was it. Very brief. I hope that yeah, you got some imagination. And I would invite you, we have a lot of information, the survey I was talking about, but also a lot of other information on waste and climate issues on our website. And it's not everything in English, but a lot of it is in English. And if you don't find your way there, please come back to me by email. We are very happy to cooperate and to discuss how you see waste and climate issues. Okay, thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you so much, Jochen Flassbart, and thank you so much, Frau Sieg, for this presentation. I'd like to turn now to Christian Egenhofer to give us a broader European view and also connect the waste management issue with larger climate change context. Christian Egenhofer is a senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Studies, a Brussels-based think tank specializing in EU affairs. And there he heads the Energy, Climate and Environment program. He's worked as a consultant in both public and private organizations, including various directorates general at the European Commission, European Parliament, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and the International Network for Environmental Compliance and Enforcement. He also has a number of academic positions. He's the Senior Research Fellow and Jean Monnet Lecturer at the Center for Energy, Petroleum and Mineral Law and Policy at the University of Dundee in Scotland, and he teaches courses on EU and energy and climate change at the Ecology of Europe, and also at the Free University of Brussels and Louis University in Rome. He is Director of Impact, the European Bureau for Consulting and Analysis, a Brussels-based political consultancy, and holds a master's degree in administration from the University of Constance, so has had early on exposure to German, things German. Christian Ebenhofer, the mic is yours, the floor is yours.
Yeah, just about Germany, because that's at the Swiss border where I'm from. So thanks a lot for inviting me, especially since I'm not a waste management person, so I give a broader European perspective to put this in a little bit in a broader EU climate change policy context. Now, the EU, as other governments, also member states, are facing the challenge of how to guide and steer the various economic sectors towards decarbonization. That the target was mentioned, 80 to 95% by 2050 reductions. So how do you do this in a situation where there is no global framework? And what kind of incentives do you provide? So it's the greening. We heard about the greening of waste management, but it's the greening of the economy as such. A part of the answer, the most recent part of the EU answer has been published in March, which was entitled A Roadmap for Moving to Competitive Low-Carbon Economy in 2020, which is a sectoral approach and looking at what can the different sectors contribute, and it's in short called the roadmap. As I said, it's a means to guide, steer the efforts. I mean, you know, some would say steer, others more guide, and they're always delicate, between the EU, the member states, business, and other stakeholders. But more importantly, or maybe most importantly, it's to develop a benchmark against which you evaluate. You know, are we getting towards our 80% reductions? Where are we in 2030? And so on and so on. Now, conceptually, this roadmap, and I try to explain a few points about it a bit later, is founded in this EU Climate 2007-8 Climate and Energy Package, the famous 2020 targets, which set greenhouse gas emissions targets at EU level of minus 20% reduction, absolute terms, compared to 1990 by 2020. 20% renewables in the final energy, which translates into something like 35-38% power renewables in the power sector. And then 20% improvement of energy efficiency against the baseline. And the last one was not legally binding, but the first two ones are legally binding, enshrined in EU law. So these are targets hard, if you wish. So what's the roadmap then? The essence, as I've mentioned, is the objective is to have the objective is to have 80% greenhouse gas reduction by 2050. Domestic, just domestic, not counting offsets. There is possibility for doing the rest with offsets. And then there are some interim milestones set out in 2020, having a 25% reduction. And you see already there's some inconsistency between this 25% and the legally binding 2020 target, and I speak about this. By minus 40% by 2030, so that's the idea, and minus 60 by 2040, so it's a kind of a trend line which is reasonably consistent. So that's about the roadmap. Now, let me now concentrate on a few key issues that are emerging in the debate that might be interesting in this context. The first one, maybe surprising to some here, is that this roadmap has been generally welcome by all stakeholders, including business. Now, I think 5 years ago this would have been a little bit different, but there is a recognition that some guidance is necessary. You know, where do you want to go and how do we get there? Now, as long as it's not a straitjacket. Now, we could, of course, discuss for about 3 days what a straitjacket is or not. But some sort of guidance seems to be acceptable. Stakeholders argue, yes, we need some sort of long-term goal. We need to see where we go. That's the sort of more philosophical part of it. But there is some more practical elements to this. It brings home some of the key messages. For example, one of the key messages is clear: if you want to achieve this objective, you have to have a basically carbon-free power sector. It was mentioned here before, so that's a clear. There's no scenario you can have a minus 80% reduction without a basically carbon-free power sector. So that's a clear marker. It's also, you also indicate see clearly, you know, what are the contributions of the different sectors. Waste management, people start to do the calculations, and we fill in, you know, our huge Excel sheet. You know, we have the calculations in there. Also, interesting, another key message here was also by achieving the energy efficiency target, you know, of minus 20%, of 20% improvement of energy efficiency by 2020. You actually, the EU would, after the economic crisis, move to a 25% reduction target, just by improving the energy efficiency. If not, it would be stuck by 20%. So these are some of the things coming out. What this also does, this kind of roadmap, is it reveals inconsistency and gaps. We have a sort of a transport trajectory target, and then freight is meant to deliver a certain amount, and nobody has a clue how freight could deliver this. You know, we just have no idea. But now the work starts, you know, what are the options for freight? And it reveals, of course, some of the controversies which are associated with this very clearly, and I would like just to finish with some of those, just briefly describe them and give some assessments. Now, the first is the role of targets. How hard should these milestones targets, you know, 2020, 2030, 2024 be? How much guidance or steerance or straitjacket should there be, and how can one ensure that actually these milestones are met and it's not just written on papers? I mean, to my taste, I think the EU relies too much, likes to rely too much on targets. I think the real thing that matters is policies. Putting the policies in place, the climate and energy package, of course, put the policies in place to reach sort of the aspirations. So I think the targets will only be hard and meaningful if actually there's a political will underpinning it to do the hard political choices. So I don't think that the point is really the targets, the point is the policies that are put into place. So I'm more of this. Now the second element is how do you share, the second key controversy, how to share the burden between the sectors and between the different member states. Quite obviously, the starting point is typically an efficiency approach. You know, you start reducing where it's cheapest. That seems to be quite an economically optimal or efficient approach, but it's perfectly politically not acceptable. You know, immediately you have the other sectors. Yeah, why do we have to do and the others have to do something? So actually you shift rather quickly to an approach that everybody does something. Now, the economic efficiency approach is nice as a starting point, but you get very quickly away from it. And we have, of course, an East-West divide, meaning a lot of potential for reductions are in the East, the new member states. Actually, they are not that new anymore. But that also means the costs are falling upon them. So you need to have some sort of transfer mechanisms. If it's financial, it's very transparent, politically very difficult and delicate. If you have a target differentiation, that is a bit less transparent and politically probably better feasible. The third controversy arising there is the emissions trading system. You know, there's a cap and trade system on power and industry. The price has collapsed or has been gone down because of the economic crisis. And now we see a situation where the price is around 15 euro, 16 euro, somewhere between $23, $25. And the question is, does this drive the decarbonization of the power sector? Probably not. And now, do we need a carbon management system, sort of a carbon bank? And that debate has now started to come into the open. And the Commission is, in a way, trying to start managing the carbon price. And now it's been very interesting to see how this debate will end up. Now, let me then just finish by saying that the issue of industrial competitiveness of industry in this context really plays a very small, if not non-existent role in this roadmap debate. Now, because my understanding is that the industry is covered by partial free allocation of allowances, and I stress partial. It's a very complicated system, not all is for free. It's partial and there's a relative low price. So that seems to be covering industry, making them sufficiently happy or not sufficient unhappy to complain too much. Maybe perhaps this is an interesting message also in this part of the universe. And now I'm just finishing here and, hand over to the real people who speak about the waste management and all the important parts. So thank you.
Thank you, Christian Egenhofer. I think that was very useful. So now we'll turn to the U.S. perspectives on the issue. We'll go next to Lori Scozzafava, who is the Deputy Executive Director for the Solid Waste Association of North America, where she represents the organization regarding all aspects of solid waste management policies. Before joining the association, she worked as the head of Maryland's recycling programs for the Maryland Department of the Environment, and she's been working in solid waste industry for over 25 years and has dedicated herself to advancing the practice of environmentally and economically sound management of solid waste. She holds a degree in environmental science from Bucknell University, an MBA from the University of Maryland, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our panel.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and an honor to be amongst colleagues who have worked very hard in an area that's near and dear to my heart, garbage. And I knew coming here that we would be comparing U.S. to Germany, who's doing a fabulous job in the area of waste management. So I thought my first slide should at least show you where the U.S. is in comparison to our colleague. And you can see by the green that the U.S. is very much in the center of where we see the very similar to what you had just shown us. And this is slightly old data. It's back from 2009. But you can see that the U.S. uses very little waste to energy. That's the blue portion at the very bottom. Sorry. And that the red portion is landfilling. So the majority is still landfilled, with recycling being right now about a third of the materials processed. Now, and again, this shows what we've seen previously is that it's quite the opposite in Germany and in many of the other European countries. So the thing that we're here to talk about today, though, is how can that change? And we know that waste does have indeed an important responsibility in climate change. And, I'm actually going to abandon the rest of the PowerPoint presentation because apparently my technology is too high. And my version of PowerPoint doesn't work here. But I'm sure that you'll understand, and I can continue without it. I'm glad that at least you got to see this. I think I first wanted to start with the fact that the IPCC mitigation report that looked globally at greenhouse gas emissions and the importance of it looks at waste as a very small component, as you've just described, that if we looked at what waste contributes in terms of carbon to the atmosphere as compared to utilities and transportation, it's actually a very small portion. But what we know about waste is that it can contribute very low-cost strategies to mitigate some of those carbon emissions. And SWANA recognizes that it's very important that waste be a component at reducing climate change. And SWANA's mission, which is SWANA, which is the Solid Waste Association of North America, is committing to advancing the practice of environmentally and economically sound management of municipal solid waste, which is our mission. And SWANA is a professional organization of individuals, which means that we're not representing the trade per se. We represent the individuals who are in the trenches and doing the work. We have about 7,500 members, about 65% of which are public sector, so government, municipal, and about 35% private sector. And we have not only an international the association that represents all those, but we also have 43 chapters throughout the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean. And what we do is provide professional development for our members in terms of education and networking and training. And our members are dealing with waste management, all aspects of waste management. So it's not simply just landfilling and landfill gas or even waste energy, but it's recycling and waste reduction, collection and transfer, special waste management, planning and management. As a matter of fact, we will be holding board meetings this week to even think a little bit about what is the world going to look like in 2030 and what is it that SWANA can do to think ahead and provide the materials and the mechanism for our members to deal with that. So zero waste, for example, is a component of all that, and we all and product stewardship, as well as the communication, education, and marketing that goes along with that. And we see huge potentials for our members regarding greenhouse gas. I think a lot of our minds always go to the negative, but there's some positives there as well. Certainly in the area of recovery and the use of landfill gas, more and more of our members are seeing the opportunity for them in the conversation regarding greenhouse gas. So yes, there are regulations that require by permit that they manage landfill gas, for example. But we've heard many of our members describe opportunities that they've had that they've been able to utilize the gas that they've extracted through direct utilization with local industry, or even they've been able to put the credits that they've earned from getting rid of the landfill gas on exchanges and have made millions of dollars in that way. We also have many of our members, or a number of our members. Waste energy is not as large as we've seen in Europe, but we do have members who are involved in waste to energy, and we see the advantages not only of reducing carbon emissions, but as described, we are engaged in an energy crisis, and we see the contribution that a waste to energy facility can make under those contexts. More and more, the trend that we see also has to do with conversion technologies, and perhaps that's the same definition that we're using, like mechanical and biological utilizations of waste, but we're creating fuels, we are creating gases and so forth from waste that can be beneficial. And then certainly utilizing our recycling and composting. I think the difficulty for us is that while it's hugely recognized, and what I see in Europe as the contribution that recycling reduction and so forth contributes to reductions of climate gases, that right now it's very hard for us to track the contributions of recycling, and that is going to make it very difficult for us to make sure that recycling is always included in our plans for reductions. But landfills, even though they are the generators of methane and therefore huge productions of the landfill gas, greenhouse gas emissions, we're also seeing contributions that can be made by our landfills. For example, just this week, I'll be heading up to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I will visit their landfill where they have a new windmill being placed up there producing electricity. We have a conference taking place in February and also one in August where we're going to be talking about landfills that are putting solar panels on their landfills. So they're using the landfill use in very beneficial ways that can make major contributions. We know that many of our states, provinces, local governments, and private sector are indeed moving ahead and making plans about greenhouse gas emissions. We're seeing initiatives on regional levels. We are seeing climate registries being developed and credit exchanges. Renewable portfolio standards are being developed. Local climate action plans are being developed by individual cities. So we are certainly seeing a lot of action taking place, and we always have a constant eye on what is happening on the federal level to make sure that we know exactly where the nation will be heading, but a lot of things are happening in the interim. And I want to talk a little bit about what SWANA's role is in all that. I guess number one, for our members, we have a responsibility, since our members are the ones who actually are the ones who have to implement the policies being discussed today. We have to understand those policies, and we also have to understand the regulations and the impacts that will have on our members, both positive and negative. And we also need to be very much involved in the policy discussions and regulations so that we can bring the knowledge and expertise that our members have about the very technologies and aspects of management that are taking place. And then we'll be sharing that information with our members through our conferences, our training and education, our publications, and our electronic webcasts and so forth, as well as doing research. I think we've talked a lot about the various different aspects of solid waste management, and I know we have other speakers who will go into a little bit more detail. So I'd simply like to conclude and just conclude with letting you know that SWANA recognizes the need for its members to be knowledgeable about what it is they can do to reduce climate change and benefit from the policy changes. And SWANA is there to help and guide education about waste's role in reducing greenhouse gases. We understand that efforts to improve solid waste management practices that reduce climate change are important and growing, but that we still have a long ways to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker will be Betsy Smeidinger. She's Division Director for Resource Conservation and Sustainability at the Environmental Protection Agency, our neighbor here just across the street. She's been at EPA for almost 23 years with positions in the enforcement and compliance assurance area since May 2009. She has been directing the Resource Conservation Sustainability Division in the Office of Solid Waste and Emergency Response, promoting the reduction, reuse, recovery, and recycling of municipal, industrial, and extractive wastes. And with her, we also have another graduate from the University of Maryland on our panel. You have the floor.
So this is, I couldn't get my slides loaded, but I think it's just as well because as each speaker has talked, I've changed what I wanted to say. So it's kind of interesting being on a panel and being near the end. I want to talk a little bit, start out with just kind of the landscape of what's going on in the U.S. and how some of our statutes and regulations kind of direct how things work. We have a statute, a law called the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, and it deals with both solid waste and hazardous waste. Under the solid waste aspect that we've really been talking most about today, there's really no federal regulations. We have statutory authority. There's great language in that statute about conserving resources, about federal government buying products that have recycled content. But when we get down to federal regulations, we have not established federal regulations for the management beyond the landfills. We have those, but when we really get to talking about recovery and recycling, all of those types of actions and regulations are done at the state level. So similar to Europe, we end up having very, very much a patchwork across the country of what's going on, as many of you know, where one locality, they will recycle a whole host and list of things where a neighboring community, they may not even have the blue bins outside their house to collect in the neighborhood. So we have a bit of a challenge within the U.S. to get the types of policies that impact things happening nationally. And that's one of the things that my program tries to do, is to come up with policies and work with organizations, come up with partnership programs that will really help to drive new ways of doing things across the country. One other thing that's related to that issue as well, there was some mention about landfill bans. And again, right now, nationally, and I have to think before I say this, but I don't think we have any national landfill bans on materials, and I'm looking at Lori to see if she's... but we do have several states that are beginning to have or have had landfill bans on different types of materials. And it hasn't been across the board on the municipal solid waste, but they've been picking out different types of materials or products. So we have several states with landfill bans of electronics or of paint. And many times where there are those types of bans, they've put in new programs, the product stewardship type of programs, where the industry is taking back those products or has set up a scheme to take back those products. But again, it's on a state-by-state, locality-by-locality process that's beginning to happen. We've heard some rumors that the carpet industry was thinking about coming to get some national legislation to have landfill bans on carpet, but that hasn't happened. I haven't seen a bill yet. But we'll continue to watch those types of things. One of the things we're also doing within EPA, we have for many years had very much of a waste focus, and with the whole focus on life cycle analysis, we've really been trying to take a shift in our waste program, at least on the solid waste side, and really take a more sustainable materials management approach. So over the past year, we've really been working to figure out how are we going to change the program, how are we going to change our shift. And one of the results of this type of shift is really looking upstream and downstream of where can we get benefits across the whole life cycle of our products and reduce that waste in the first place so that we're not even having to deal with that waste. It's a challenging undertaking. We're having to start with small steps and hope to have successes in a small way and then continue to build out. But again, it's really to look at how do we reduce waste in the first place. If we can continue to have increasing recycling rates, although we aren't seeing recycling rates, and they've really been pretty stagnant for the past 5 to 10 years. There's been some small changes, but not significant changes. So really looking at how do we get that next step? How do we get the country the next step in really managing materials, reducing the amount of waste, and taking value in the materials that are in our waste stream? One of the things we do have a very good report, and this is one of disadvantages of not having the slides up. We have a report called the Sustainable Materials Management Road Ahead report, another Road Ahead report, that really talks about that whole type of approach of looking at materials across the whole life cycle and changing the shift from waste to the materials aspect. There was a lot of data analysis that was done to support that report, and really gives very good information about the types of things that we should be thinking about and looking at. So nationally, as Lori mentioned, we have been, she has the statistics up here, but just to go in a little bit more details, as a country in 2009 we generated 243 million tons of municipal solid waste. That equates to about 4.3 pounds per person per day of waste. And as a country, we recycled or composted 82 million tons, which is about 34%. And again, the percentages on the recycling rates and composting has been pretty constant. We combust or incinerate 29 million tons for energy recovery, which is about 12%, and we've been discarding 132 million tons into our landfills, which is about 54%. We do have a report on EPA's website that really goes into a lot more detail on the different types of materials. It breaks down those numbers by materials, by different product areas. One of the things that we have had for quite a while now is EPA has two different tools that allow people to look at how they're going to manage their waste and convert those management practices into the greenhouse gas reductions. So there's two models. The one is called the waste reduction model. It's a very easy to use tool. It's online. It's free. It's easy to use because we use a lot of default values in it, but people can just plug in some of their information and it gives you the results of the types of greenhouse gas emissions you can get by doing different management practices of your waste. We also have a tool out of our research and development office that's much more comprehensive. You have to pay to use it, but it gives you a much more detailed analysis of different decisions you could make in your waste management approaches that'll point to the types of savings you can get on your greenhouse gas emissions as well as cost savings. Both of those tools have been helpful, and I have to make sure you have those websites so you can share those with your members if they're not aware of it. So in looking at some of the numbers that are on this graph, and it's perfect that that graph is still up there, as I mentioned, we have in the U.S. approximately 82 million tons were recycled of municipal solid waste in 2009. And using the WARM model, that municipal solid waste avoided emissions of 178 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. I think just to wrap up, one of the things that we also have as a challenge is getting people to understand that there is the waste to climate connection. While I think this crowd hopefully doesn't have to be convinced, and obviously the speakers here are totally convinced that there's this connection, we still find a lot of people that we have to convince that are questioning, how do these models work? Is there really this connection? So we're not, in the U.S. we're still having to make that the case and still continue to show that there's benefits from managing our waste in smart ways that will get us also greenhouse gas reductions. Along those lines, we also did a report that took EPA puts out a greenhouse gas inventory, and we reorganized that inventory on a systems basis, which showed that about 42% of the greenhouse gases are related in some way to waste management types of practices. So we continue to try to do those types of studies and put out information that will help people to understand that their waste management practices make a difference.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker is Karen Stiles. She's the Business Development Manager, Sustainable Services at Waste Management. She's a lead AP and member of Waste Management's National Sustainable Services Team. She's a corporate strategist, helping organizations to integrate sustainable practices into their ongoing operations, resulting in increased productivity, market share, and consumer satisfaction. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our panel.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. And I'm going to, these are not exactly what my slides look like, so we'll do the best we can. I don't know what the rest of them look like. But it's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and it's actually kind of a good place for me to be in being last, is that it's our role as a Fortune 500 company in the area of waste management to kind of implement these policies and procedures not only for ourselves but also our customers. And as you can see here, as I said, all the pretty things are gone, but we no longer consider that we're in the waste management business, but we're actually in the materials management business, and trying to work with our customers to reduce the materials at the front end of the process, and thereby reducing what comes out the back end, and putting those policies and procedures in place for the organizations that we work with. We do feel that we are a leader in environmental leadership, and as I said, being in the waste business, we're automatically in the environmental business. Again, we're a little bit behind Europe, or at least Germany and other parts of Europe. We're finally accepting the fact that sustainability is not a fad, it's not going to go away, and even in hard economic times, we thought that perhaps it was going to go by the wayside, but actually, I believe that the economic times actually speeded things up here in the U.S. because we realized that it made good financial sense to be good stewards of waste and materials and everything else that we're dealing with. These are some of the highlights of our company. I'm not going to go through them for you, but this fourth one here we're kind of proud of, and that was our goal was by 2020 to have 100 of our facilities certified by Wildlife Habitat Council, and we actually met that goal in December of 2010. So we did that 10 years early. So, and the rest of our goals, we're moving things along pretty quickly. Well, there we go. Again, as you know, sustainability is a hierarchy. I also like to consider it a journey, and when we're looking at our customers, everybody's at a different place. And part of the challenge that we have here in the U.S. is because our land mass is so vast, we have to look at things regionally and sometimes statewide because of also the rules and regulations by the state. But what works in one area of the country, and we're the Northwest for us is probably further ahead than the rest of the country, but what works in the Northwest where you've got urban centers doesn't work in the farm country, and logistics and the trade-off of greenhouse gases and transportation play a role in that as well. So when we look at this hierarchy, what was radical thinking a while back, and that was recycling, is now conventional, and it's standard operating procedure. The next thing we look at is zero landfill. And that's, again, we've got folks who have embraced that. We have industry that is there or will be there soon. But again, the most difficult is zero waste, and I think that's what we're all struggling with is, how far can we get in the elimination of waste itself, and not only reusing what we have, but rethinking how we package things, how we transport things, and that's where human ingenuity, that's why I get excited about this, because it's all about human ingenuity for me, to see how we can solve these problems now that everybody really accepts the fact that it's not going to go away. So some of the things that we focus on is environmental solutions for customers, extracting more value from the materials, and minimizing our own impact on the environment as a company. And some of these I'm going to zip through because we've already covered many of them. We have a team within our organization called Sustainability Services. It's the team that I'm a part of, and our role is not just to focus on waste management, but to go into organizations, industries, municipalities, whatever, and help them to focus on the front end of the process. What comes in the front door, so we're not dealing with as much out the back door. And for many organizations, that is really thinking outside the box, and it's also kind of counterintuitive. You're a waste company, you grew up on landfills and trucks, and now you're talking to me about not transporting waste. And so we're changing the way we focus on things, but actually we want to help our customers change the way that they look at things. So single stream recycling, we've talked about recycling. Single stream has been a real turning point for us here in the U.S. It makes it much simpler. I don't know if you've ever been in one of these facilities, but they're really amazing. There's conveyor belts and blowers and magnets, and they're all pick up different kinds of materials, bail them up, and then they're resold as commodities. And this makes it very, very simple for the typical person or business. Organics. Again, once you get single stream recycling going, then people look at what's left, and it's typically organic. So then the next question is, okay, so now what do I do with this stuff? So we're really just getting organics rolling here in the U.S. Again, we've got parts of the country that are a little bit further ahead than others, but we've got dozens and dozens of organics facilities going in around the country, and we should be well on our way by the end of the year with that process where it doesn't already exist. E-waste recycling we've covered. This is a process that we've invested in where we can take recycled PET and actually use it as a process to really replace styrofoam, so that styrofoam doesn't go into the waste stream, and we're able to create products like coffee cups and containers and things that used to be made out of styrofoam material. Solar compactors, this is just an example of consumer-friendly, user-friendly recycling on the go when you're not at home, you're not at work. These are great little things. They, again, don't use any electricity. They're solar-driven. They compact at 5-to-1, so there's much less transportation needed to come and pick things up and empty them out. So a lot of municipalities are going in this direction. We've talked about energy from waste. That is still controversial in some areas and with some groups here in the U.S., especially the waste to electricity, but it exists, and we have a number of facilities. We have 17 plants, and I don't think it's going to go away. I think it may be an interim step when we start doing some other things and we reduce the waste, but it is here. Landfill gas to energy. We are actually using that in BMW's manufacturing plant in South Carolina. They're running off of gas that comes off of one of our landfills. The University of New Hampshire operates completely off of gas from one of our landfills. So that's an area where we're really going to be expanding. But one of the interesting thing is waste management, energy from our waste powers more homes in the U.S. than the entire solar industry. So it's not a minor detail. It is something that is making quite an impact. Landfill gas to liquids. This is kind of exciting. We actually run our fleet of trucks in California from the gas that's produced from the facility that we have out there, the landfill gas to liquids. So again, this is something that we can do more with. Just another example of an industry that this one is focused on biomass, and it's going to be using organics to create green transportation fuel. So again, there's a lot of exciting technology out there. This one, and these are all companies that we have invested in. So we're no longer investing in landfills. We're now investing in industry that will use either the waste that doesn't go to landfill or will enable us to reduce the amount of waste completely. But this one is a process that actually allows us to reuse or repurpose hard-to-recycle plastics. And plastics is, it's a real issue. It's a real issue. So that's, as a company, we are doing many things internally, and this is just one example of our fleets because we talked about transportation. So I'm not going to take a whole lot of time on that, but I think that, again, as a company, we have to look internally. We have to walk the talk. We just can't go out and help our companies become more efficient themselves. We need to be sure that we're doing it. And I think having third-party governance, third-party recognition, third-party goals and objectives is an important thing for industry and manufacturers to be able to be measured against others, again, according to these third-party measurements. Thank you.
Super, thank you. Thank you also for being so succinct, and all of you for sticking to the time limits. That leaves us with about half an hour for questions or comments on your part. We're webcasting this event live, so if you could wait for the microphone and state your name and affiliation if you like. So, questions, comments? Yes, gentleman in the back.
Thank you for lunch, and thank you for the panel for taking the time, and in particular all the European travelers. I know it was quite an effort. You know, by the way, my name is Brian Behar. I'm with Covanta Energy. We own or operate about 40 waste energy facilities in the United States, as well as facilities in Europe and in China. That's what we primarily do. We also have some landfills and some transfer stations, but first and foremost, you know, energy from waste. I just wanted to mention that I think you are I'll say the German representatives here were more than humble in presenting kind of what they've achieved over what I'm going to say is about a 30-year effort in, I'll call it regulatory and policy efforts. Because you didn't get to 66% recycling just because it was a general policy. I mean, there's a long history, and I don't know if it was really apparent to the audience, but like in between development of, I'll call it the environmental sensitivities and informing your politicians through a lot of legislation, to implementation of a landfill tax that began to divert waste away from landfills to recycling, to a lesser extent energy from waste. But it took a long time for that to happen. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is because, and I'm sorry I can't see your name from the US EPA, when you're asking like how does the United States make that next leap? My background in research and development says the first thing you don't do is start from scratch. You research what other people have done, what works and what doesn't work. And it appears that there's quite a good story when you look at what's worked in Europe and conversely what hasn't, because if you look at the landfill directive, some countries have said it's an obligation, not just legally, but maybe ethically when you look at, you know, how I'm going to manage things. And some have responded and some have not. I don't think that policies, and I know you're mentioning that about the Egenhofer, about the policy versus targets. Sometimes policies just don't work unless there's teeth behind it and something to make people change their behavior. I think America is an example of that. If it just makes you feel nice, people won't do it. Just one last comment if I could. I think to clarify, there's a lot of numbers that are thrown out today, but I think it's important for people to understand the difference between a life cycle assessment and just a simple calculation. The IPCC calculations, as well as the US EPA greenhouse gas inventory, only looks at the emissions on a year-by-year basis. And as Marlene Seek presented, they used a first-order decay model. That says it takes 100 years for waste to decompose. So they're only looking at it a year at a time. They're not looking at 100 years all at the same time. That's what a life cycle does.
Okay, thank you. Great question to get us started on the transatlantic dialogue. I don't know if Betsy, you want to take this.
Yeah, I guess the two models that I mentioned, the waste reduction model and our decision support tool, the DST, they both are based on life cycle analysis that supports those underlying assumptions. So it's not, you know, it builds in the life cycle.
Okay, anybody else on the panel like to respond?
Well, I would agree that if you want to reach this percentage of recycling, you definitely need a very strong leadership. It does not work by itself, but it's a mixture of instruments, and I think it starts with consumption patterns, make people thinking about what they can contribute, but this alone will not work, and we are now increasing our ambition in recycling. You could see in the on the slides that there are still some countries ahead, so we want to compete on that. And yes, as I said, you need a mixture of instruments, and on this one I would slightly disagree about the question of how relevant targets are. I mean, you have different types of targets. Binding targets, then they are powerful, but also the non-binding targets give at least a direction and make industry understand in which direction they should think before stronger legislation takes part. And if you look, for example, at the climate change issue, one of the sectors where we in Germany are far behind is the mobility sector. And in my assessment, this is due to the fact that we don't have a sectoral target for the mobility sector. So sometimes you need it to give some guidance, and sometimes you have also strict targets, but at the end you need a mixture of instruments.
Thank you. Let's go to the colleague from the German embassy, he's the one you should thank for lunch. So.
Okay, but this is not about the lunch. I actually, normally I don't deal too much with waste or garbage, and I was fascinated by the presentations. Now I have a question that regards many of you, and that is about the economics of waste to energy. If I hear this, it seems more or less a no-brainer. I have to pay to get rid of my waste. Now, somebody gets that, so he gets paid to collect the waste, so he gets the fuel for free to burn it and then to produce energy. So to me, it seems like something. Why doesn't everybody do it on its own? What is the problem? Why do people not do it more on their own? Why do we have to forbid landfills? Why do we have to ban landfills? Or why is there a problem with the incineration? After all, I mean, you get the fuel for your power plant for free.
Someone else? Okay.
I can give a start. I mean, the one problem is that you have a special fuel, which is not like like oil or gas or whatever coal what you use, but it may be get up to you in very different forms that you cannot definitely influence, and it's quite costly because we have this flue gas cleaning, which uses up a lot of money to install this, and then it depends very much how you organize it. For example, in Denmark, which is a very, very good European model, they have organized it all very locally or regionally, and it means that the community or the region, because you need a bigger region to build an incineration plant. You cannot just do it by like 30,000 people or something like that. You need a region with, let's say, 1 million people or 2 million or something. They own the incineration plant, and they own the district heating. So they can somehow fix the price for what they take to get the garbage, and they fix the price for the heat they deliver to people. And so in Denmark, a lot of people, or most people, are very, very fond of incineration because they have low prices for the waste and low prices for the district heating. And as they have strict emission control, they don't worry too much about what about air emissions. And so you can organize it, like you say. It might be of great value, but yeah, difficult to get it like that.
Maybe I could add a little bit to that. Here in the U.S., landfilling is very inexpensive. As was described, we have the land and the capability of providing operations that are relatively inexpensive. When you have a waste-to-energy facility, you have to incorporate all the externalities of those expenditures into the facility itself and into your operating costs. And so, yes, the operating costs for a waste-to-energy facility are higher than the operating costs of a landfill. And so they're the incentive from that perspective is not there unless there's a policy or a long-term perspective on the part of the community in which the facility is to put that facility in place. And as you've just described, that there's also economies of scale. And that, yes, and so that makes a difference as well.
Thank you. Anybody else on that issue?
I think, again, understanding that we're a little bit further behind in the process, there's also the concern that waste to energy takes away some of the incentive to recycle. We have some communities that don't recycle because it goes waste to energy, and the energy provides electricity for the community, and so they're not recycling. So it's kind of a chicken and egg in that particular case.
Okay, thank you. Let's take another question. Lady up front here. Please wait for the microphone. It's coming.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I'm Tiffany Secker from Climate Wire, and it seems to me like the agricultural sector in managing their waste has been very advanced in the way they collect methane and install biodigesters. Has the municipal waste sector kind of taken lessons from that, both in Europe and in the United States?
Thank you. Would like to take that one on.
Go ahead.
Betsy? Yeah.
I was just going to mention, on the organics, we're really starting to focus as very much an area of opportunity in the U.S. to increase the recycling rate, increase the recovery rate, and anaerobic digestion is definitely one of the ways that we're looking at, as a possible management. And I would imagine Waste Management's doing some work in that area as well.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I would add that there are some real inhibiting factors from looking at agriculture and then translating those experiences to solid waste, mainly because waste is in no way, shape, or form homogeneous. And so when you have a manure or hay or any other agricultural material, it tends to be homogeneous, and so you can build systems for large quantities of material, and again, then you get the economies of scale that make those operations work very efficiently. So it's a little bit of a challenge to translate those kinds of experiences and apply it to solid waste.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, over there.
My name is John Alexio. I'm a management consultant. As a management consultant, we're looking for efficiency and effectiveness. Is there among the Germans and the Americans a defined vision and a plan to achieve what you have told us? Or the Germans came here to see what the Americans are doing, and the Americans to take a look what the Germans are doing? We could exchange information and avoid duplications. Thank you.
Well, difficult to react. I think this is what happens. My feeling is that the cooperation is much better than it obviously appears to you. We have a lot of exchange of experiences between experts and policies, and of course we are always on our way to enhance this, but I don't see this as a most critical point, to be honest.
Okay. Gentleman over there.
Lars Friberg, Climate and Energy Attaché, Swedish Embassy. Sweden has, as Denmark and others, been quite active in promoting waste to energy, and one of the key roles there is the use of CHP, combined heat and power. So, for example, Gothenburg, our second largest city, 30% of its heating is from the waste plant, 15% of its electricity. My challenge when I look at this and how one could try to promote these kinds of solutions for Americans is that it's very much a systems solution. where you have the different actors come together. I believe the technology is often German when it comes to the incineration, and so it's very a different and difficult mix to put over. It's not just one single technology. How do you think one could try to promote these kinds of solutions in the US, and also particularly how to overcome this concern about incineration as a solution here in the US, where it has kind of a bad reputation?
Okay. Let's, you want to go first, but I think there are several of the panelists might comment.
I don't have a direct answer, but I have an example of where EPA has played a convening role to bring different parts of the U.S. economy and society together. We recently were having discussions on packaging and sustainably financing packaging, because a lot of those costs right now go to the municipalities. We had brand owners at the table with some very large companies. We had states, we had municipalities. And it was very interesting to hear the discussion of some of the companies not realizing the impacts of their products on the municipalities, and the municipalities not understanding the materials that were in the packaging, how they could deal with them, if they could recycle them. And just having those types of discussions, I think, creates a better awareness, creates some opportunities, and opens people's minds to some of the things they need to be thinking about in the system. So, you know, what I'm taking away is these are the kinds of discussions we could set up through EPA, where we're bringing different types of parties in to make sure that everybody understands the system and how they play in the system and the impacts that they have, and how to start coming up with solutions.
Anybody else to comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one point is the experience we can show. For example, what I always feel here in the U.S. is this, in a way, sad discussion of zero waste, where I think they are fighting the wrong enemy. I mean, I wouldn't say waste incineration is the total solution. On the long run, we have to change our production and consumption patterns. But at the moment, for the time being, it's a bit sad to say we want zero waste and fight against incineration, but put our residuals to landfill without thinking about it, or without worrying too much about the methane getting out. And I mean, although you might collect a lot of it, still huge emissions of methane are going to air out of the landfills, and it's just burying stuff you could use for recovery. And so it's sort of, I mean, it's understandable here. Probably if we hadn't had the point in Europe that we are maybe running out of place if we put more and more and more into huge landfills. But you have other problems with that here, and just make a shift and think differently about it. And we can show these examples from Europe to say all the countries that have high recycling rates also have a share of incineration. So it's not that what goes against each other. And maybe to think about this sort of arguing. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to add a little bit. SWAN is not in a position to make policy or to make that kind of global regulations and so forth. But what we do is we exchange information, and we promote the integrated approach to solid waste management at every turn. And we even once a year have a senior executive seminar where we pull together the executive directors from the larger solid waste systems and allow them to exchange information. And our hope is that the gray hairs that they got are the ones that we can spare other people by sharing what it is that they've learned. And hopefully what will happen is they're the leaders. They're the ones who are showing other people how it can be done. And those are the systems that regulations will be based on in the future.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes, I'd like to ask our American colleagues.
Could you introduce yourself,
sure.
please?
Bobby Falzeitler with Green News Update. I'd like to ask our American colleagues first about electronic waste, e-waste, because there seems to be both good news and bad news about what is happening with the ability to recycle the metals and components in e-waste. And sadly, I think we've all read about how a lot of e-waste from the United States ends up going to other countries where it is being, if you will, processed by children and people working in pretty abysmal conditions. Even the Japanese are having a great deal of trouble in recycling rare metals, recycling their own minerals. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what are the policies in the U.S., and from the practical side, what are we doing to recycle e-waste?
Thank you.
So there's a whole lot going on in the used electronics arena. And again, the U.S. is taking a life cycle approach to it. There's actually an interagency, federal interagency task force that's working right now to come up with a report that was tasked by the president on America Recycles Day back in November. There's 4 different areas that the report is looking at. Basically, the life cycle approach from design through, how do we capture some of the rare earth metals that are in the electronics. Domestically, what are practices we can do domestically, exports, and then also how can the federal government lead by example. The report was supposed to be out in early May. We are still working some of the issues and hope to have the report out by June. The report will contain a lot of recommendations and actions that the different agencies are looking to take and partnering together to tackle the problems. One other point to make on the recycling aspect, we do have 2 accredited certification programs in the U.S. for used electronic recyclers. The one program is called R2, Responsible Recycling, and the other one is called eStewards. So they have, I think, approximately 80 facilities between the 2 programs now that have been certified. And again, it's a way to raise the bar to make sure that these facilities are handling the electronics properly and doing it in a safe way.
As a company, we are involved with those programs, and then to your point, we also work with our customers to raise their awareness of the regulations and to make sure that they're compliant. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to add, although the question was to the American colleagues, we have in Europe quite elaborated regulation on e-waste, but still, although we have increasing percentages of recycling, still we are facing the problem of illegal e-waste exports to other countries, and you mentioned some of the problems, children's work involved, hazardous substances going to somewhere in the world where we don't have control over them. That is simply due to the fact that we don't have a perfect system yet, because these facilities are usually exported not as waste but as operating facilities, and that is a problem to get a better understanding how to separate still products in use, operating products, and where it starts to have the qualities of waste.
Laurie,
I just would say that what we see our role is to educate. And so we have a training course on best practices associated with electronic waste that would encourage the same kind of things that you described in terms of making sure that the materials go to legitimate places.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Let's take one more.
Thank you.
Question.
Lieutenant Colonel Per Rasmussen from the Danish Embassy here in Washington, D.C. I have more comment than I have a question, I guess. My Swedish colleague there from the Swedish Embassy pointed out to what mechanisms works over here, and I think you have to put it pretty simple. I think it's still the question of money. Does it pay or doesn't it pay? That's a motivational factor, whereas in Europe we have for a long time looked at the environmental issues as the primary, and then we discovered that actually waste can be transferred to money. I work a lot with the Pentagon. I think Pentagon has been going to be the drive in this country on energy and that following clean environment. And the Pentagon is very, very willing to listen at the moment, because every time the gas prices goes up to a level like now, everybody looks at the Pentagon as the single biggest consumer in this country and asks them what they're doing. So they're very motivated. So to my Swedish colleagues, I say, look at the Pentagon, talk to them. They're very willing to listen. Bring up the good solutions. An example from Denmark has been mentioned a couple of times. We have a little municipality in the northwestern part of the country. I don't want to offend anybody, but you could probably compare this area to West Virginia. People that are very sort of like settled, and they don't invest in things that doesn't pay for them. They use common sense. This little municipality of 46,000 people is now 85% independent of fossil fuels. And they've done that over a number of years, since 1973 when we started. And they've done it with common sense. And they're proud of what they've done. And when you see the eating bill going from here and the curve goes down, it's really an example to follow. So I would encourage my U.S. friends here to look at Tistad, which is the name of the municipality, and follow that example, because that really makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is anybody who really wants to pose a question? We'll have maybe just for one more.
Good afternoon. I'm Serena Corbetta, an Italian lawyer. My question concerns the e-waste. Some of you mentioned as a policy that you are pursuing the information of consumer and the involvement of the public. And one of the core principles of the European legislation on e-waste is the extended responsibility of the producer, which is very effective in terms of leading the producer to adopt automatically a policy of eco-design or product constructed in order to be easily dismantled or easily reused. So my question is, are you thinking about an implementation of this principle in your internal and domestic legislation? Or do you already have something specific?
Again, because of the way solid waste is managed in this country, we actually have 24 or 25, I'm not sure what we're up to now, states that have their own take-back programs for electronics. So within those states, they have set up systems, and they're all a little bit different, of different ways and different funding mechanisms to take back the electronics and make sure that they get properly managed within that state. Again, that hasn't been discussed nationally from a national legislation perspective, but we do have states that are taking that type of an approach.
Great.
I just want to add, there are industries, Sony being one of them, who, even though they're not legislated and regulated to do that, have taken on that extended producer responsibility, but it's not been mandated.
Thank you so much. I think this was a fascinating panel. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists.